There's great interest in the scientific and academic community about whether psychedelic substances can be valuable therapeutic tools. On today's video, we will discuss if there are certain cultural and ritual aspects that can also play an important role in a therapeutic process. Hi, my name is Ramiro from Kymera Warriors. There are many important conversations that we're having in the world of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. For example, how can we acknowledge the importance of traditional cultures as custodians of ancestral knowledge? How we can protect such cultures from colonialist practices? And how to prevent practitioners of such disciplines from incurring in cultural appropriation. However, there are other topics that are important not only for the person guiding the process and holding space, but also for the patients in the case of a therapeutic process, or a person interested in gaining a deeper knowledge of themselves. For this video, I am going to be using the example of an ayahuasca ceremony because I think it's the most well-known case of a ritual entheogenic practice. But keep in mind that the ideas and the concepts that I'm going to be sharing apply to other shamanic practices as well. So the first thing I'd like to address is that there's not just one tradition or way of doing things. Here in my country, in Ecuador, there are 14 different officially recognized indigenous nationalities, and several of them use ayahuasca as a traditional practice, and every one of them has different rituals, different cultural contexts, different languages, and different symbolisms that they use. If you understand that this huge variety is more or less the rule in every country where ceremonies are held, you can begin to understand how diverse this ritual can be. We should be careful not to fall in the trap of thinking that one of those practices or one of those cultures is better than the other. This applies not only to the ritual use of entheogens or master plants, but also to other shamanic practices, like for example the shamanic drumming or ecstatic dance, who doesn't involve the use of psychedelics, and that can be just as valuable both culturally as well as therapeutically. The second idea that I like to share is that while culture and tradition go hand in hand, they can also contradict one another in some ways. What I mean by this is that while tradition strives to keep things the same and without variation, culture is more like a dynamic force that tends to adapt to external circumstances. In the ayahuasca example that we're using, tradition dictated that it was the yachak who has both the knowledge and the spiritual authority to prepare the brew. Nowadays, however, some groups have opened to the idea that the preparation of the brew can be a communal endeavor. A second example can be that traditionally, some animals were used as spirit guides or power animals by certain groups, but other animals were considered taboo. Nowadays, this has changed in some places, and there are certain traditional groups who are starting to use animals that were not traditionally used as power allies. A curious example is a group that I know of that prepares not only the traditional, for example, jaguar ayahuasca, but also prepares a dragon ayahuasca. And what's funny is that the dragon is not only not a traditional animal, it's not only a real animal, it's a mythological one. So this is an interesting one. Traditionally, it was the yachak who drank the ayahuasca brew, and sometimes together with the consultant, but it was more often than not a two-person thing. In this context, the plant had the role of an assistant or a teacher, and actually this is where the term master plant comes from, because the ayahuasca had the role of guiding or teaching the yachak what the consultant should do to fix his problem, and also to tell the yachak what he should do to aid in this healing process. Nowadays, on the other hand, ayahuasca ceremonies are usually held in groups instead of in a two-people setting. And the ayahuasca not only guides the consultant in the healing process, but there are some people who believe that ayahuasca had a medicinal value in and of itself. There's a really good video where Dr. Bayer talks about the difference between traditional practices and modern cultural practices, and I'm going to leave the link in the description below or in the cards that appear in the upper right corner. And lastly, the third topic that I'd like to share with you today is what I call the spiritual factor. What we have to keep in mind is that many of these ritual practices had the goal of helping the consultant reach a higher state of being, an upper world, or an altered state of consciousness. Even if we're talking about someone who doesn't subscribe to the spiritual or energetic paradigm, but prefers to use the academic or psychological model, we can usually agree that the goal for using psychedelic tools in a therapeutic process is to help the client achieve some kind of higher realization, what we will call a therapeutic insight. This is especially true in the case of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, or in the case of entheogenic rituals in general, where people usually report having some kind of contact with higher spiritual beings or even with the highest version of themselves. So what happens when a person in this higher state of consciousness and non-ordinary reality gets the insight that he or she has to do something that falls outside of the tradition? This is the case with different wise men and women from different cultures and from different parts of the world who have felt this spiritual calling to open their knowledge to people and cultures outside of their own. This, of course, opens up the opportunity to have the discussions I mentioned at the beginning of the video regarding how to help practitioners not to fall into colonialist and cultural appropriation practices. We'll be doing a video about this specific topic in the future. It is my opinion that it's not the best option to approach this conversation from a polarized point of view, where the only two options we have are either tradition should be strictly preserved at all costs, or culture is dynamic and therefore traditions should be disregarded completely. I believe that we as human beings are ready to understand that it's not always black or white, and that we don't have only these two options available for us. I'm a strong believer in the importance of authenticity for all human beings. Therefore, I believe it's very important to value and respect the people who have felt this calling to become the custodians or guardians of their traditions, and who are doing superhuman efforts to rescue their cultural values. And I also believe it's important to respect and value the people who, having the proper education and qualifications, have felt this calling to open up and share their knowledge. It is only in the peaceful coexistence of these seemingly opposite positions that we'll be able to become the right kind of people. People who can use such practices in a way that benefits the modern world, while at the same time giving the proper respect and homage that ancestral cultures deserve. And now that we're talking about the right kind of people, if you want to know what characteristics have a great practitioner of entheogenic medicine, as well as what characteristics have a practitioner that you should avoid more than COVID, check out the next video.